You're listening to the Integrative Health Simplified podcast with Kari, Coody, pharmacist turned integrative health practitioner. Here we talk all things straightforward and honest when it comes to holistic health and simplifying your best steps forward while eliminating all the gimmicks and confusion. Leave the overwhelm at the door and get ready for impactful action steps that get to the real root of your issue and actually move the needle in your health. Let's dive into the show. Hey there. It's Kari here, and I am back for the last episode in our series all about underlying infections. This is actually the last episode in season 1 as well. So I'm so thankful that you have been with me, whether it's just for this episode, maybe you're super new here, or if you've been listening since the very beginning of this podcast, which was earlier in the year around March. Just super thankful that we can have these conversations. And I hope that this information that I'm sharing is really helping to simplify the whole world of integrative health and just to help you just to improve your health, because really we want to improve our health to really further our ministry and do what God has called us to do. So I hope this podcast has helped you to be able to do that. But without further ado, let's hop into today's topic, which we are rounding out this series all about underlying infections, and we're going to talk about viruses. And I just want to reiterate that I put these episodes in the order that you would need to go about really just looking at underlying infections and go about, kind of digging into each issue in that particular order. So just keep that in mind. If something really resonates with you, or if you're really trying to kind of DIY this yourself, there is a certain roadmap, if you will, that you want to follow. And so that's why I put these they kind of build on each other too. So if you're just joining me for this episode, you might want to go and listen to all the other ones in this series and just kind of catch up. And I think it'll make a lot more sense. So in this podcast, I just wanted to talk about our viruses and our viral load and like, how does this fit in with underlying infections? The title of this podcast was Unmasking Viruses, the Immune System and Underlying Infection Load. Those things are really, really important when you think about this topic, because, there's like 90 to 95% of our population has, really back up. There are so many viruses that we're surrounded with. Like, it's the most abundant microbe on the planet. And so I really wanted to dial it in for you as far as this podcast goes, just to talk about one that really affects a lot of us, and that's Epstein-Barr virus. And so it's in the herpes family. I'm sure you're probably familiar with that. But this virus is one that can really rear its head whenever there are certain things that throw off the balance of our immune system. And so that's kind of what I wanted to focus on in this podcast episode, because 90 to 95% of those in our population struggle in some way, shape, or form with Epstein-Barr. It might be that you struggle greatly with it, or it might just be that some of these, things that might be going on could be related to this and you not even know it. And so before we really dig into it, I think that it's important to note that people look at viruses differently. Like, there's the germ theory, and then there's more the terrain theory. And so really, really simply, the germ theory is just that all bugs are toxic to us. And a lot of times people will recommend vaccines to counteract those bugs, as in, virus, bacteria, all those things. And so the terrain theory is really more so on the side of it's really because of our own terrain. That's why they're becoming toxic to us. It's not because they are toxic. It's because we are toxic, pretty much. And so I kind of fall somewhere in between, probably more on the terrain theory side for sure. But those are kind of two separate camps that are sort of, now that I explain that, I think you understand what I'm saying by that. So kind of try to figure out where you might fall in that, but hopefully this information will help you. So one other thing to note is that viruses are something that we don't fully understand. And something that's really kind of unique and interesting is that we have something called exosomes, which are super similar to viruses, but they don't infect us like viruses do. And so they're really almost identical. They both contain DNA. And exosomes and viruses do share a lot of the similarities in why and how they are released from the cells. And exosomes are excreted in times of stress. And so that's just really interesting to note, before I kind of go into the next part of this and just talking a little bit more about our immune system. So our immune system has, just in a broad view, has two different sort of branches. Like there's T1 and there's T2. And each part is sort of dominant to handle certain things. So if that part of the immune system is sort of weighed down because it's so busy, like dealing with all these things that we're throwing at it, then the other side of the immune system is going to be weaker. It's kind of like stealing energy, if you want to think about it like that. And so it's interesting to note that, which side of the immune system handles different things. So on the Th2 side, it would handle things like mental stress, pesticides, mold, parasites, EMF, which are electromagnetic frequencies. That's going to be a whole nother podcast episode. So some of you might know a little bit about that. I'm not going to go into detail on that right now, but that is something that is obviously all around us with all of the Bluetooth and things like that. And it can really have a toll on our immune system. And so all of those are what we call Th2 promoters. And so what side of the immune system do you think handles our viruses? It's the Th1 side. And so if all of those things are basically stealing all the energy from our immune system, then viruses come out and play pretty much, because the side of the immune system that would keep them in check is too busy. Like it doesn't have enough energy. And so that is really kind of the key to all this, to be honest, with when viruses go, because it's not like you're going to get rid of them 100%. Like you literally have to have a bone marrow transplant. And so it's just something that we're not looking at, just like with any of these underlying infections. It's not about just completely ridding your body of every single virus. Like that's not possible anyway. It's really about keeping them, where the immune system has them in check. Basically, it's all about a balance. And so that is really super key. The Th1 and Th2 parts of the immune system. That is key with a lot of these underlying infections, because you can there's a ton more that I could kind of put in those two categories, but I wanted to simplify it down for this episode just to help you to see, like, if we're constantly stressed, if we are constantly exposed to all these toxins and chemicals, if we even have mold, we talked about how that just makes everything worse. If we have parasites, which are out of check, which a lot of people do, all of those things are going to drag down that Th2 immune system, and it's going to allow these viruses to come out and play. So hopefully that makes sense. But I wanted to just share some symptoms that often come with Epstein-Barr when it's in what's called a flare. This would be massive fatigue, joint pain, swollen lymph nodes are a really, really big one. Sometimes you can have fever, but oftentimes infections turn down fever, especially viral infections, because obviously fever is good for your body. It helps to kind of melt down and get rid of some of these things. And so sometimes you don't always have a fever because it's your body's way of, it's these underlying infections' way of surviving. And so sometimes you have a fever, but not always. It does really affect your spleen and liver. So even sometimes, like if somebody has, like a child or an adult has mono, to kind of see how they're progressing, they will percuss your liver to see if it's sensitive, because your liver actually gets swollen because it's just kind of on overdrive. So that's one thing that can happen. And a lot of these things sound like chronic fatigue syndrome. It sounds like fibromyalgia. Even rheumatoid arthritis and MS. Sometimes they can, Epstein-Barr is at play with some of those things. A few other things that oftentimes Epstein-Barr is at play at as well would be Hashimoto's, Alzheimer's, and Sjogren's. And so that's just something to kind of consider. One other really unique thing that if you had this happen, it's probably Epstein-Barr related in some way, shape, or form, is that if you get mosquito bites and they swell up really big, a lot of times that has to do with Epstein-Barr. So those are just, it's a short list, but basically Epstein-Barr is just going to really take a toll on your immune system, and it's going to just kind of really zap you of energy. And so that, this virus and other viruses, it gets into your system. There's maybe that acute onset, but then it goes latent and it only comes back in times of stress. And so sometimes people will have mono when they're younger and they don't have any other symptoms once those acute ones go away. But then later on, they might have a lot of these symptoms, but not really realize that it's connected. And so it really does come back out in times of stress because of all those Th2 promoters that I mentioned. And so sometimes symptoms aren't as severe the second time, but they are still due to this virus. So one thing that's really something to consider is that this is extremely related to long haulers that has to do with COVID. So if you had a really hard time after COVID, you got hit really hard, or you had a lot of the long hauler symptoms, then Epstein-Barr is probably at play for you. But the goal here is just to have a healthy immune response, specifically the Th1 side, and try to decrease some of those Th2 promoters. I'll just mention those again. Those were mental stress, EMF, pesticides or like toxins, mold, and parasites. So that's hopefully makes sense in the whole grand scheme of things of like, this is definitely a balance. It's not about eradicating. It's really about a healthier immune response so that we can keep these things at bay and they can, have a good role in our body and not be something that causes us a lot of symptoms. I do want to mention two things that are really helpful when it comes to Epstein-Barr. And these are, supplements that you can take. Obviously, I'm not just going to recommend that you throw supplements at things, but I don't want to leave you hanging if you feel like you're really struggling with this. And these can be obviously used, during times of stress where you feel like your immune system is lower. One would be something called ImmuneArmor. This is from a company called VerVita, and this has a lot of great vitamins and minerals and a few other things that are super good for your immune system. It actually has thymus tissue in there and different types of tissues that are going to help your tissues then work better. And there's an herb that I also like called Astragalus. This is from Supreme Nutrition, and it can really help with immune response and help with that Th1 side. So those are kind of just two. Obviously there's more, but I wanted to just give you some ideas on how you can help your immune system and help to keep this virus at bay. So hopefully this was super helpful, and this series was helpful to you. I'm excited to come back in season 2 at the start of 2024 and come at you with some more great topics. I would love to know if you have some topics that you would like to hear from me. I would love to know what those are and hopefully work those in sometime in season 2. So if you want to DM me on Instagram, that's a great way to get in touch with me, or I'll have my email in the show notes in the description of this video. So anyway, you can get in touch with me. I would love to hear from you, and hope you guys have a great rest of 2023, and I will see you back in 2024. If this episode has served you in any way, I would love it if you'd share any aha moments or takeaways over on Instagram and tag me at Kari Coody. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so we can continue to learn and grow together.